The backstage corridor was unusually silent. For a Michael Jackson show, silence was never normal. There should have been laughter, music echoing through the walls, dancers warming up, technicians shouting last-minute instructions. But instead, there was only tension, thick, heavy, suffocating. Michael Jackson was seated on a chair under harsh white lights. A white towel was pressed firmly against his head. Slowly, unmistakably, it began to turn red. Blood. It trickled down through his black hair, slipping along the side of his face. His eyes were open, distant, unfocused. Crew members gathered around him, frozen between panic and disbelief. Is he okay? What happened? Did he fall? Can he still go on? Someone whispered the words no one wanted to hear. Michael is injured. Within minutes, rumors exploded. Some said he had collapsed from exhaustion. Others believed something had gone wrong with the stage equipment. A few feared the worst, that years of pressure, pain, and overwork had finally caught up to him. Outside, thousands of fans waited, unaware that the show was moments away from being canceled. Inside, everyone was asking the same question. What happened to Michael Jackson? And when the truth finally came out, the real reason behind the head injury, it stunned everyone in that room, because it wasn't what anyone expected. Backhand Index Sporting Rights stay with this story, because what caused Michael Jackson's head injury reveals not just a shocking moment, but a powerful truth about who he really was behind the legend. The night was supposed to be flawless. Inside the massive arena, more than 40,000 fans filled every seat, every aisle, every corner. The air vibrated with anticipation, a restless energy that only existed when Michael Jackson was about to step on stage. Giant screens glowed softly. The band was in position. Dancers waited behind the curtain, stretching, whispering, breathing in rhythm. Backstage, Michael stood alone for a moment, just a few feet away from the chaos. He wore a black military-style jacket, perfectly tailored, with subtle gold details that caught the light. His gloves rested on a nearby table. His breathing was shallow but controlled. This was not unusual. Before every show, there was a moment like this, a quiet pause between the man and the legend. But something was different tonight. Michael raised a hand to his head and winced. It wasn't a sharp pain. It was dull, spreading, uncomfortable. He pressed his fingers gently against his scalp, just above his temple. When he pulled his hand away, he froze. There was blood, not much at first, just enough to stain the tips of his fingers red. Michael stared at it, confused, as if his mind needed a few extra seconds to process what his eyes were seeing. Michael? A voice called from behind him. He turned slightly, trying to remain calm. I'm fine, he said softly, almost automatically. He always said that. But as he moved, the world tilted. The bright lights backstage seemed harsher. Sounds blurred together. His balance shifted, and he reached instinctively for the nearest chair, sitting down before his legs could give out. That's when the panic began. A stage manager rushed toward him. What happened? Did you hit your head? I don't know, Michael replied. His voice was quiet, strained. I didn't fall. Another crew member noticed the blood first. There's blood, she said, her voice rising. His head is bleeding. Within seconds, the small backstage area filled with people. Someone grabbed a towel. Someone else called for medical staff. The towel was pressed against Michael's head, and almost immediately, the white fabric darkened. Red. The room fell into a stunned silence. Michael Jackson was bleeding. For a moment, no one spoke. These were people who had worked with him for years. Through grueling tours, impossible schedules, exhaustion that would have broken anyone else. They had seen him perform injured, sick, in pain. They had seen him push through moments no human body should endure. But this was different. This was visible, unavoidable, real. Should we cancel? Someone whispered. Outside, the crowd roared, unaware. The opening music was scheduled to begin in minutes. Michael closed his eyes briefly. He hated this part. The waiting, the uncertainty, the feeling that his body was betraying him at the worst possible moment. He felt embarrassed, more than afraid. I don't want them worried, he said quietly. Please don't let them worry. The medic knelt in front of him, examining the injury carefully. Michael, did you feel dizzy earlier today? Michael hesitated. Then he nodded slightly. I've been tired. That was an understatement. For weeks, his schedule had been relentless. Rehearsals stretched late into the night. Interviews, meetings, perfection demanded its price, and Michael always paid it himself. The medic lifted the towel slightly and frowned. The cut isn't deep, he said, but there's more blood than expected. Did he hit something? Another voice asked. Michael shook his head again. No, I didn't hit anything. That answer confused everyone. If he hadn't fallen, hadn't been struck, hadn't collided with equipment, then how had this happened? As they debated, the blood continued to seep, slow but persistent. The towel was replaced with another. Outside the curtain, the crowd began chanting his name. Michael, Michael, Michael. Each chant felt like pressure building inside his chest. He looked up at the people around him, dancers, crew, technicians, many of them younger, all of them watching him with fear they were trying to hide. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. The room went still. Sorry? One of the dancers repeated. For what? For this, Michael said, gesturing weakly to his head. For making everyone worry. That was Michael Jackson. Even bleeding, even hurt, even moment away from potentially canceling a show for tens of thousands of people. His first instinct was guilt, responsibility, the fear of disappointing others. The medic met his eyes. Michael, listen to me, he said firmly but gently. Your safety comes first. We need to understand why this happened. Michael nodded, though his thoughts were drifting. Memories surfaced. Other nights, other injuries, other moments where he had pushed himself past the limit because the show had to go on. But tonight, something felt different. As they cleaned the wound more carefully, the truth began to reveal itself. There was no impact mark, no sign of trauma, no evidence of a fall. Instead, the medic noticed something else. The skin around the cut was irritated, fragile. Has your headpiece been adjusted recently? He asked. Michael's eyes opened slowly. Yes, he said, this afternoon. The room quieted again. A wardrobe assistant stepped forward, suddenly pale. The new attachment, she whispered. It was tightened more than usual. The realization hit like a wave. The injury hadn't come from an accident. It hadn't come from collapse. It hadn't come from weakness. It had come from something far more disturbing, something slow, silent, and overlooked. And as everyone began to understand what had truly caused the bleeding, a heavy shame settled over the room, because the truth meant this wasn't just an injury. It was a consequence, and it raised a painful question no one wanted to ask out loud. How much pain had Michael Jackson been enduring without saying a word? The crowd outside kept chanting. The clock kept ticking. And backstage, as the blood was finally controlled, everyone realized that this night would be remembered, not for performance that almost happened, but for what it revealed about the man behind the legend. The bleeding had finally slowed. Backstage, the chaos softened into a tense, careful calm. The medic disposed of the blood-stained towels, replacing them with clean gauze. Michael sat still, obedient, his posture straight despite the exhaustion weighing heavily on his shoulders. The injury was under control now, but the question remained. How had this happened? The wardrobe assistant stood near the wall, arms crossed tightly over her chest, replaying the afternoon over and over in her mind. She could still feel the moment she had adjusted the headpiece, tightening it slightly to make sure it wouldn't shift during spins, jumps, or the violent precision of Michael's choreography. At the time, it had seemed like nothing. Now it felt unforgivable. Michael, the medic said gently, can you tell me when you first felt discomfort? Michael hesitated. He always did when asked about pain. This morning, he admitted quietly, during rehearsal. And you didn't say anything? Michael gave a small, almost apologetic smile. It wasn't unbearable. That was how he measured pain, not by whether it existed, but by whether it was unbearable. Everything else, he endured in silence. The medic exchanged a glance with the production manager. The pressure from the headpiece, he explained. combined with sweat, heat, and hours of movement. It likely caused friction, continuous friction. The skin broke. A simple explanation, and yet no one in the room felt relieved, because a simple cause raised a much darker truth. This injury was preventable. Someone exhaled sharply. Another person looked away. No one spoke for a moment. Michael finally broke the silence. "So, I can still perform?" he asked. The question landed heavily. The medic chose his words carefully. "Physically, you could," he said, "but you shouldn't. Not tonight." The dancers stiffened. The stage manager swallowed hard. Canceling was unthinkable, but pushing Michael back onto that stage felt wrong in a way that went beyond logistics. Michael looked down at his hands. For a brief moment, the legend vanished completely, and what remained was a tired man wrestling with disappointment. "They're waiting," he murmured. "They came to see me." "They came to see you alive," the medic replied softly. That phrase changed something. Michael closed his eyes. Outside, the chants grew louder, restless. The crowd didn't know what was happening. Only that time was passing, and their anticipation was turning into confusion. A production assistant hurried in. "We need a decision," she said quietly. "Now." The room felt impossibly small. Michael took a deep breath and finally nodded. "We'll postpone," he said. "Tell them I'm sorry." Again sorry. The decision spread quickly. The lights dimmed. The music that was meant to signal the opening number never played. Instead, an announcement echoed through the arena. A hush followed. Not boos. Not anger. Silence. Backstage, Michael listened to the distant murmur of thousands of people trying to understand. His chest tightened. He imagined their faces. The disappointment. The worry. The rumors already forming. Someone handed him a mirror so the medic could check the bandaging. Michael glanced at his reflection and barely recognized himself. Pale, drawn, vulnerable. "I didn't even feel it at first," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "I thought it was just sweat." The wardrobe assistant stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Michael, I'm so sorry. I should have checked more carefully. I should have..." Michael lifted his hand gently. "Please," he said, "don't blame yourself." That, too, was Michael. He protected others, even when he was the one bleeding. But the truth couldn't be ignored anymore. This wasn't just about a headpiece or a single mistake. It was about a pattern, one everyone in that room had contributed to. Schedules pushed too far. Rehearsals that ignored fatigue. Adjustments made for perfection, not comfort. And Michael, always silent, always compliant, always unwilling to say no. The medic finished securing the bandage. "You'll need rest," he said, "and we need to monitor you closely. Head injuries, even minor ones, are serious." Michael nodded. "I understand." But his eyes drifted toward the curtain. "Can I talk to them?" he asked suddenly. The production manager looked surprised. "Talk to the audience?" "Yes," Michael said, "just briefly." There was hesitation, risk, liability, but no one could deny him this. Moments later, a microphone was brought backstage. The curtain opened just enough for Michael to step forward, not onto the stage, but close enough that his voice could carry. The arena quieted instantly. "My friends," Michael said, his voice soft but steady, "I'm so sorry I can't perform for you tonight." A ripple moved through the crowd. "I wanted to be with you more than you know," he continued. "But sometimes the body tells you it needs rest, even when the heart wants to keep going." Silence. "I promise," he said, "I'll make it right, and I thank you for your love and your understanding." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then applause. Not wild, not explosive. Respectful, emotional. Backstage, several crew members wiped away tears. Michael stepped back, exhausted but calmer. The pressure in his chest eased slightly. He had faced him honestly, something he rarely allowed himself to do. As he sat down again, the medic observed him carefully. "Michael," he said, "you need to start telling us when you're in pain." Michael gave a faint smile. "I'll try." But everyone knew trying had never been his strength. As the arena emptied and the night wound down, the injury was already fading into rumor and speculation outside. But backstage, something had changed. The truth had been revealed, not just about the wound, but about the cost of perfection. And as Michael was escorted quietly out of the building, one thought echoed in the minds of everyone who had witnessed that night. If something this small could draw blood, how much had he been bleeding silently for years? The arena was almost empty now. Rows of seats that had been filled with energy and expectation stood silent, littered with programs and glow sticks abandoned in confusion. Outside, fans lingered in small groups, speaking in hushed voices, replaying the announcement in their minds. Inside, behind closed doors and guarded hallways, Michael Jackson was being escorted to a quiet room away from a noise. This was the part no one ever saw. He sat alone on a low couch, the white bandage wrapped carefully around his head, his hands resting loosely on his knees. The adrenaline that had carried him through the announcement was fading, replaced by a heavy wave of fatigue. His body finally allowed itself to feel everything it had been suppressing. The throbbing in his head intensified. The door opened softly. One of the senior production managers stepped in, closing it behind him. "They're clearing the building," he said gently. "Everything went smoothly." Michael nodded. "Good." There was a pause. "You scared everyone tonight," the man added, not accusing, just honest. Michael lowered his gaze. "I didn't mean to." That sentence, more than anything, captured the core of the problem. He never meant to. He never wanted to worry anyone. He never wanted to be a burden. So he endured. He adjusted. He smiled. He pushed through until his body forced the truth into the open. The medic returned with paperwork and instructions. "I need you to listen carefully," he said. "Tonight wasn't just a fluke. The injury itself is minor, but it's a warning sign." Michael looked up. "A warning for what?" "For exhaustion," the medic replied. "For stress. For ignoring pain signals. Your body can't keep compensating forever." Michael absorbed the words silently. He had heard versions of this before. Different doctors, different tours, different years. The message was always the same. Slow down. And he never did. "Do you remember when it started hurting?" the medic asked again, probing deeper. Michael hesitated. Then quietly he said, "Yesterday." The room stilled. "Yesterday?" the medic repeated. Michael nodded. "During the last full rehearsal. When I spun, I felt a sharp pull. Right here." He gestured vaguely near the wound. "And you didn't tell anyone?" Michael shrugged faintly. "It was just pain. Pain passes." The medic sat back, troubled. "Pain is information, Michael." Michael smiled weakly. "I've had a lot of information in my life." The medic had no response to that. When the room cleared again, Michael was left alone with his thoughts, and that was the most dangerous place for him to be. His mind drifted backward, as it often did in moments of vulnerability. He remembered being a child, bleeding knuckles hidden behind gloves, sore feet wrapped tight before shows, bruises ignored because a performance had to go on. Pain had never been something to address. Pain was something to endure. A knock interrupted his thoughts. One of the dancers stepped in hesitantly. "Michael, I just wanted to check on you." Michael straightened instinctively, as if preparing to reassure. "I'm okay," he said immediately. The dancer didn't look convinced. "We all felt helpless out there," she admitted. "We didn't know what was happening. We just waited." Michael swallowed. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said quickly. "We just want you safe." Safe. The word lingered after she left. Michael leaned back, staring at the ceiling. When was the last time he had felt truly safe? Not physically, emotionally, without expectations, without pressure, without the constant sense that thousands of people were counting on him to be flawless. His phone buzzed softly beside him. A message from his mother. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" Michael closed his eyes. "I'm fine, Mama. Just resting," he typed back. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The truth was more complicated. The truth was that the injury wasn't the scariest part of the night. What frightened everyone, even Michael himself, was how close he had come to collapsing in front of the world without warning. Not dramatically, not heroically. Quietly, the medic returned one last time. "We're arranging transport," he said. "You shouldn't go home alone." Michael nodded. As he stood, dizziness hit him suddenly. He reached out, steadying himself against the wall. For a brief second, panic flickered across his face. A rare, unguarded expression. "I've got you," the medic said firmly, supporting him. Michael exhaled shakily. "Thank you." As they walked down the corridor, Michael passed a mirror. He stopped, catching his reflection again. The bandage, the fatigue, the vulnerability impossible to hide now. He stared at himself longer this time. "This can't happen again," he whispered. But deep down, he didn't know how to stop it from happening. The system around him demanded perfection. The world expected magic. And Michael Jackson had built an entire identity on delivering both, no matter the cost. Tonight, the cost had finally become visible. Outside, a few fans remained behind barricades, hoping for a glimpse, a sign, anything. When Michael was quietly guided past, one of them called out softly, not screaming, just pleading. "We love you, Michael." He paused. He turned slightly, raised a hand, and gave a small wave, not the grand, electrifying wave of a superstar, just a tired man acknowledging kindness. As the car door closed and the engine started, Michael rested his head back against the seat. The city lights blurred past the window, stretching into long streaks of gold and white. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to think the thought he always pushed away. What if I can't keep doing this the same way anymore? The question frightened him more than the injury ever could, because it meant change. And change meant confronting a truth he had avoided for a lifetime, that even legends have limits, and that sometimes the most dangerous silence isn't the crowd's. It's the one inside yourself when you refuse to say, "I'm not okay." The hospital room was silent in a way Michael Jackson knew all too well. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a kind that carried weight. The kind filled with soft beeping machines, distant footsteps in the hallway, and the unspoken fear that something had gone wrong. The lights were dim, casting pale reflections on the white walls. Michael lay propped against pillows, a thick bandage wrapped around his head, his hands resting motionless on the blanket. The panic had passed. The shock had settled. Now came the questions. If he hadn't fallen on stage, if no one had pushed him, if there had been no accident at all, then why was he here? A gentle knock sounded at the door before it opened. A doctor stepped inside, calm, composed, with a kind of expression that suggested he wasn't there to alarm Michael, but he wasn't there to sugarcoat the truth either. Instead of standing over him, the doctor pulled up a chair and sat down, meeting Michael at eye level. "Michael," he said quietly, "we need to talk about what really happened tonight." Michael nodded slowly. He had been waiting for this conversation. The doctor glanced briefly at a clipboard, then looked back up. "When you were treated backstage, you mentioned having pain before performance. Head pressure, dizziness. You said it started during rehearsal the day before." "Yes," Michael replied softly. "And this wasn't the first time you felt this way, was it?" Michael hesitated. His fingers tightened slightly against the blanket. "No," he admitted. "It's been happening for a while." The doctor took a slow breath. "How long?" Michael stared at the ceiling, the answer heavier than he expected. "Months." The word hung in the air. The doctor nodded, unsurprised. "Michael, the injury to your head wasn't caused by a fall or a collision. There was no external trauma." Michael turned his head slightly. "Then what caused it?" "Extreme physical stress," the doctor replied. "Severe exhaustion, dehydration, prolonged pressure on your body without adequate recovery." Michael frowned. "So my body just failed?" The doctor shook his head gently. "Not failed, reacted." He leaned forward. "Your blood pressure spiked suddenly. Combined with exhaustion and dehydration, it caused internal strain that led to the bleeding. Your body reached its limit, and it chose the worst possible moment to tell you." Michael closed his eyes. "So this wasn't random," he said quietly. "No," the doctor replied. "It was inevitable." That word hit harder than the diagnosis. Inevitable. You didn't collapse because you're weak. the doctor continued. You collapsed because you've been pushing yourself beyond human limits for too long. Michael swallowed. I have people depending on me, he said. Fans, my team, my family. The doctor's voice remained calm but firm. People depending on you does not mean you're required to sacrifice your health or your life. Michael let out a soft, almost bitter laugh. That's been my life since I was a child. The doctor didn't argue. Instead, he asked a simple question. When was the last time you truly rested? Michael searched his memory. A full week with no rehearsals. No pressure. No expectations. Nothing came to mind. I don't remember, he admitted. The doctor nodded. That's exactly the problem. He stood up slowly. This injury scared everyone not because of the blood, but because it revealed something far more serious. Your body has been asking you to stop for a long time. Tonight, it stopped you instead. After the doctor left, the room felt even quieter. News had already begun to spread. Outside the hospital, rumors were multiplying. Speculation, theories, panic. Some claimed an on-stage accident. Others whispered about sabotage. No one knew the truth yet. But inside that room, Michael did. Later that night, his mother arrived quietly. When she entered, Michael's composure finally broke. Mama, he whispered. She sat beside him, taking his hand gently. Her eyes were full, but her voice was steady. You scared me, she said softly. I'm sorry, Michael replied immediately. She shook her head. No, I'm sorry you felt you had to keep going when you were hurting. Michael looked away, blinking back tears. I didn't want to let anyone down. She squeezed his hand. Taking care of yourself is not letting people down. After she left, a representative from the production team stopped by. His voice was careful, tense. There are concerns about the canceled performance, he said. Sponsors are asking questions. Michael listened quietly. Then he said, I won't be performing until I recover. The man hesitated. Michael, this to her. I understand, Michael interrupted calmly, but my health comes first. For the first time in years, there was no negotiation in his voice. Word spread quickly backstage. Michael Jackson was stopping. Some were shocked. Others were relieved. And far away, in the arena that had fallen into complete silence earlier that night, fans began to understand that what they witnessed wasn't weakness. It was a warning. Late that night, alone again, Michael stared at his reflection in the darkened window. The city lights blurred softly below. He touched the bandage on his head. I'm not invincible, he whispered. Saying it out loud frightened him, but it also gave him something he hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. The injury had terrified everyone, but the truth behind it was deeper than anyone expected. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't fate. It was a lifetime of pressure and a body that finally demanded to be heard. And this time, Michael Jackson was listening. The days following Michael Jackson's hospitalization felt unreal, as if time itself had slowed down out of respect for what had happened. Outside the hospital, cameras waited endlessly. Reporters speculated. Fans prayed. Headlines contradicted one another. Some claimed the injury was minor. Others whispered that it was far worse than anyone was admitting. Social media flooded with videos of the moment he collapsed. Replayed again and again, each frame analyzed as if the truth could be extracted from pixels. But inside the hospital room, none of that noise mattered. Michael sat by the window in a robe, the bandage still wrapped around his head, watching the city move without him. Cars passed. People walked. Life continued. And for the first time in decades, he wasn't part of the motion. It unsettled him. For most of his life, movement had defined him. Rehearsals, flights, stages, lights, applause. Even rest had always been temporary, a pause between demands. Now, doctors had made it clear there would be no rushing back. Your body needs weeks, one doctor had told him firmly, possibly months. Months. The word echoed in Michael's mind. Months without performing. Months without rehearsing. Months without the roar of the crowd. Who am I without the stage? He wondered. The question frightened him more than the injury itself. That afternoon, a close member of his team visited. Someone who had worked with him for years. Someone who knew when to speak and when to remain silent. He pulled up a chair, studying Michael carefully. "You scared everyone," he said gently. Michael nodded. "I know. The fans are worried," the man continued. "But more than that, they're quiet." "Quiet?" Michael asked. "Yes. Not angry. Not demanding. Just quiet. They're waiting." Michael looked down at his hands. "I always thought if I stopped, even for a moment, they'd move on." The man shook his head. "They didn't. They're worried about you, not the show." That realization settled slowly, uncomfortably. Later that evening, Michael was given permission to watch footage from the arena, not the collapse itself, but what came after. The doctor warned him it might be emotional, but Michael insisted. The screen showed the massive venue, lights dimmed, thousands of people standing in absolute silence. No chanting, no boos, no confusion, just stillness. Then came the moment no one had expected. A single fan, somewhere near the front, had raised a hand and softly said, "Pray." The word rippled outward like a wave. Within seconds, the entire arena followed. Heads bowed, hands held, thousands of strangers united not by music, but by concern. Michael felt his throat tighten. They weren't there for performance anymore, the doctor said quietly. They were there for you. Michael turned off the screen, tears filling his eyes. All his life, he had believed his value came from what he could give. The dance, the voice, the perfection. He had built his identity around never disappointing anyone. But that night, when he had given nothing, they stayed. The next morning, his children visited. Prince tried to act calm, but his eyes betrayed him. Paris hugged him tightly, refusing to let go. Blanket climbed onto the bed quietly, resting his head against Michael's arm. "You scared us," Paris whispered. "I know," Michael said softly. "I'm sorry." Prince looked at him seriously. "Dad, you don't have to keep hurting yourself to make people happy." Michael closed his eyes. "I thought that was my job," he replied. "No," Prince said. "Your job is to be here." Those words stayed with him long after the children left. That afternoon, Michael made a decision. He asked his team to release a statement, not written by lawyers, not filtered through publicists. He dictated it himself. It didn't talk about schedules. It didn't promise a quick return. It didn't reassure investors. It said this: "I am alive because my body forced me to listen. I have spent my life giving everything I had to the world. Now, I am learning how to give something back to myself. Thank you for your prayers." I felt them. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in, not demands, messages of love. Parents wrote about watching the silence in the arena with their children. Fans shared stories of praying together for someone they had never met. Michael read every message he could, and slowly, something inside him shifted. One evening, alone again, he stood in front of the mirror. The bandage was smaller now, but still visible. His face looked thinner, older, real. "I don't have to disappear to rest," he said quietly to his reflection. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where stopping didn't mean failing, where silence wasn't absence, where worth wasn't measured by applause. The injury had terrified everyone, but what came after terrified Michael even more, because it forced him to face a truth he had avoided his entire life. The world didn't need him to destroy himself to love him. And maybe, just maybe, neither did he. The doctors cleared Michael Jackson to leave the hospital on a quiet morning, long before the city fully woke up. There were no cameras outside the exit, no crowds, no dramatic statements. Just Michael, a hat pulled low over his eyes, stepping carefully into a waiting car. The world expected updates, explanations, conclusions, but Michael wasn't ready to give them yet, because the truth behind his head injury wasn't simple. It wasn't a single accident. It wasn't bad luck. And it certainly wasn't carelessness. It was a moment that had been building for years. Back at home, Michael moved slowly through the house, touching familiar objects as if seeing them for the first time. The piano, the books, the framed photos of his children. Everything felt quieter, heavier, but also clearer. That afternoon, his physician and a longtime confidant sat with him in the living room. This time, Michael didn't avoid the conversation. "You know people will eventually ask," the doctor said gently, "what really happened." Michael nodded. "I know." The doctor hesitated. "Are you ready to say out loud?" Michael looked down, then took a breath. "I didn't fall because of the stage," he said softly. "I fell because my body finally gave up trying to protect me." The truth came out slowly. On the night of the injury, Michael had been rehearsing relentlessly, not because anyone forced him, but because he forced himself. He had skipped meals, ignored dizziness, pushed through pain that should have stopped him hours earlier, not out of ego, out of fear. "I was terrified," Michael admitted. "Terrified of disappointing people. Terrified of not being enough. Terrified that if I stopped, even for a moment, everything would fall apart." The doctor listened quietly. "I've been doing this since I was a child," Michael continued. "When I was tired, I danced. When I was scared, I sang. When I was hurt, I smiled. I never learned how to stop. The injury happened during a simple moment, not a stunt, not a dangerous move." He had turned too fast, vision blurred. The room spun, and then darkness. No dramatic fall. No warning. Just exhaustion reaching its limit. "That's why the cut was so frightening," the doctor explained. "It wasn't the wound itself. It was what caused it." Michael closed his eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to say what he had always hidden. "I was running for myself." In the days that followed, Michael made a choice that stunned his team. He canceled upcoming appearances, not postponed, not rescheduled. Canceled. He refused to give a timeline for his return. When asked why, he gave a simple answer. "Because I need to learn how to be human again." Fans reacted with shock, then understanding. The footage from the arena, the silence, the prayer, it had changed something. People weren't demanding explanations anymore. They were listening. One letter arrived that Michael read over and over. It was from a fan who had been in the arena that night. It said, "When you fell, we didn't feel like we lost a show. We felt like we almost lost a person, and that scared us more than silence ever could." Michael folded the letter carefully and placed it beside his bed. One evening, weeks later, he sat with his children on the floor, playing quietly. No music, no choreography, just laughter. Paris looked at the faint scar still visible near his hairline. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. "Sometimes," Michael replied. "Is it bad?" Blanket asked. Michael shook his head. "It reminds me to rest." Prince studied him thoughtfully. "So was it worth it?" Michael understood the question. He thought about the injury, the fear, the silence, the prayer, the realization. "Yes," he said finally, "because it saved me from something worse." "What?" Paris asked. "From losing myself completely." Months later, when Michael finally spoke publicly about the incident, he didn't dramatize it. He didn't hide it either. He said this: "My head injury frightened people because it was visible, but the real injury was invisible. Years of exhaustion, pressure, and fear stopping. That night, my body chose honesty when I couldn't." The world listened. Some were surprised. Some were saddened. But most felt something else entirely: relief. Because for once, Michael Jackson wasn't performing strength. He was choosing it. The injury that had terrified everyone turned out to be a message, not just to the world, but to Michael himself. A reminder that even legends have limits. That silence can be an act of love. That stopping doesn't mean failing. And that sometimes the most powerful thing a performer can do is survive.